Sometimes we think we need to subdivide when really what we have is a color mixture problem. So for instance, if you're noticing a hard edge, there is the temptation to make a subdivision there so that we can smooth out the transition. But my guess is that she's mixing the color a little wrong. Probably there's a little bit of skin tone mixed in with this hair color and a little bit of hair color mixed in with this skin tone, so we wouldn't get such an abrupt line. You can see the smoother transition when we get over here to her side swipe bangs. You can also see the way in which this mouth definitely looks much more robot-like than that first subdivided mouth that we looked at. But part of why it seems to flatten out is because she's holding on to the local color of the teeth a little bit too long. She's trying to make her teeth look white instead of letting them have the shadows and highlights that they need. If we go back, if you look at that color, that's really dark. That's really gray. We're getting a lot of variation in this. But when we first looked at this mouth, it's not like you looked at it and went, girl, you need to brush your teeth. What we have instead is optical color mixing, a color that makes sense in the context of all the other colors that are around it. So what we want to do is have that variation. If things are flattening out on you, it might be a subdividing issue, but probably it's a color mixing issue. And if we had softer transition out of the teeth and into the lip and then the cheek, we probably wouldn't read that as a sort of robot bar of teeth. Similarly, when we are subdividing, we also want to pay attention to expanding and collapsing the grid instead of creating new shapes. See the way in which my eye kind of catches on these long vertical rectangles? Partly because there's such a flat, unmodulated color. Surely there's at least some variation happening in that hair. Look at the way in which her skull basically disappears under a solid blank of hair. But part of why we notice this area right here is because they're different shapes. And if we have expanding and collapsing squares, we don't notice them as much. But when you introduce another shape, a triangle, a rectangle, or whatever, it's going to catch our attention, which is too bad because there's a nice sense of gradient and we really do get a sense of the light falling on this form. When you're selecting your photograph, look out for ones that have big blank dead areas. You can get away with it in a photograph that you might not be able to get away with in a painting, but do select something that has a nice sense of light. We want that light to convey a sense of volume. The way this forehead looks like it's actually got enough space in it to hold the brain. So we have a sense of the volume. We're going to talk about chiaroscuro when we talk about the properties of color, but basically it's using value to create a sense of volume. This looks round because I have darks and lights and transitions in between. This one's working really well, but here's another area where you think maybe she needed to subdivide, but I don't think this is a subdivide problem. I think this is a color mixing problem, because while yes, her crooked little smile, which is going to be so adorable in the source photo, is hard to translate that diagonal when we're doing a grid. The real reason I catch right there is because this square is too dark and this square is too light, and I get a whole lot of contrast. Again, there was probably a little bit of tooth color in this unit, and there definitely would have been some lip and some gum in this. So if we have a softer transition here, I don't notice that hard edge where it feels like there's something wrong with the subdividing. It is true that if you don't subdivide much, you are going to get stair steps, and that's what's happening to Ryan's cigarette here, where it is at an angle and angles are hard to translate. One of the other things I used to tell students is that if you don't subdivide around your eyes, the darker colors are likely to take over and you're going to look like you have a black eye. Well, Ryan is a smartass, so he brought in a photograph of him with a black eye, but he still had to subdivide around it to create a sense of how it sits on the face. Also, One of the things that we're going to see is that a lot of times it's hard to get the nose to come forward. Well, maybe what we do is we get the nose to come forward by how we handle the eye sockets or the cheek next to it or things like that. So if I squint at this, the shadow under and beside the nose is what gets the nose to come forward just as much as having a really strong highlight that really catches the eye. Here, the highlight is useful, but so is the shadow behind the nose. So that's something that you can control as well.